The streets of Brookhaven pulsed with the uneven rhythm of a city straddling two worlds, one of ambition and enterprise, and another of corruption and quiet desperation. For years, the residents had whispered about police misconduct, but no one dared speak too loudly. To challenge the badge was to invite ruin. On the corner of Monroe Avenue stood Iron Forge Gym, a brick-walled, no-nonsense facility known for its relentless training regimen and loyal clientele. Its owner, Marcus Kane, was a man whose presence commanded attention without a word. Broad-shouldered, with a quiet intensity in his eyes, Marcus carried himself with the steady confidence of someone who had seen the worst the world could offer and survived it. Most in the neighborhood knew him as a former soldier who had returned from service to invest in his community. What they didn't know was that Marcus had once been a Delta Force commander, operating in shadows where failure wasn't an option and mercy was a luxury. He had retired from the military not because he had grown soft, but because he wanted to build something of his own. The gym became more than a business, it was a sanctuary. Young men came there to find discipline instead of trouble, veterans came to sweat out their demons, and the community found in Marcus a quiet guardian. But power, whether earned or imposed, always attracts predators, and in Brookhaven, some of the most dangerous predators wore badges. The Brookhaven Police Department's 12th Precinct had long been notorious for its special detail. Officially, the unit was tasked with investigating narcotics and gang activity. Unofficially, it was a crew of dirty cops who shook down business owners, planted evidence, and padded their pockets with the very crime they were meant to fight. The ringleader was Lieutenant Craig Hollister, a man with a square jaw and cold blue eyes, who believed authority gave him the right to take whatever he wanted. For weeks, Hollister's unit had been circling Iron Forge Gym. They saw Marcus's success, the steady stream of clients, and assumed money flowed freely inside. In their minds, he was an easy mark, just another small business owner who would fold under pressure. They never considered the possibility that he was more dangerous than any street gang they had ever faced. The shakedown began on a humid Friday evening. Marcus had just finished locking the back door of the gym when a patrol car pulled up, followed by a black SUV. Four officers stepped out, their hands resting casually on their belts. Hollister was among them, his smirk thin and calculated. "Mr. Kane," Hollister drawled, as if they were old friends. "Got a minute?" Marcus's eyes flicked over them, noting their postures, the way their hands lingered near their weapons, the slight twitch of tension in the youngest officer's jaw. He had spent years reading men in high-stakes situations. It took him less than a second to understand their intent. "I'm closed," Marcus replied evenly. "Whatever you need, come back during business hours." Hollister chuckled. "This won't take long. We've been getting reports, claims that there's some suspicious activity tied to this establishment. Drugs, illegal cash flow. You know how it is." Marcus tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. "Do you have a warrant?" The lieutenant's smile hardened. "We don't need one if we've got probable cause. And believe me, we can find it." Or he leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You can save yourself the trouble by making sure we don't have to look too hard. A weekly contribution, let's say. Call it protection." The other officers shifted, their smirks making it clear this was routine for them. Marcus said nothing for a long moment. The air around him seemed to tighten. Most men would have caved, intimidated by the sheer power imbalance. But Marcus Kane was not most men. "Get off my property," he said at last, his voice low and firm. "You've got 5 seconds." The officers blinked, surprised. Hollister's smirk faltered, then returned with a cruel edge. "Wrong answer, Mr. Kane. We'll be back. And next time, it won't be a friendly conversation." They left, but not without making their intentions clear. One officer kicked over a trash can, another spat on the pavement. Marcus stood silently until their vehicles disappeared down the block. His jaw tightened, but his pulse remained steady. He had dealt with warlords, insurgents, and men who lived to kill. Compared to them, these officers were amateurs. Dangerous amateurs, but amateurs nonetheless. Still, he knew better than to underestimate them. Corrupt cops had the weight of the law behind them, and in many ways, that made them even more dangerous than armed combatants. The following week, their harassment escalated. Clients leaving Iron Forge Gym found themselves ticketed for bogus infractions. The police cars loitered nearby at all hours, lights flashing just enough to unsettle customers. Late at night, Marcus returned to find graffiti on his walls and broken glass at his doorstep. Finally, one night, they made their move. Marcus was closing up when Hollister and 6 officers barged inside, their guns drawn. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as the men fanned out, overturning benches and rifling through lockers. "Freeze! This is a raid." Hollister barked, his voice dripping with mock authority. Marcus stood calmly near the center of the gym, his broad frame unmoving. "Do you have a warrant?" "We don't need one when we've already got evidence," Hollister sneered, holding up a small bag of white powder one of his men had conveniently found under a weight rack. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He had seen plenty of planted contraband in war zones, used to justify raids and roundups. He knew exactly what game they were playing. "You expect anyone to believe that belongs to me?" he asked coldly. "No," Hollister admitted with a shrug. "But the DA will. The judge will. And the public? They won't care. You lose everything. Unless," he stepped closer, his grin widening, "unless you start cooperating." For the first time, Marcus let a smile touch his lips. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile that sent chills down a man's spine, the kind of smile that said he had already calculated 10 different ways to end the situation in his favor. "You boys picked the wrong man," he said quietly. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Hollister scoffed, but beneath the bravado, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. He had dealt with scared men before, angry men, desperate men. But Marcus Kane was none of those things. He was calm, too calm, and that calm was about to erupt into something none of them were prepared for. Marcus moved with a speed that belied his size. In less than a second, his hand snapped up, disarming the nearest officer with a bone-crunching twist. The man screamed as his wrist shattered, his gun clattering to the floor. Before the others could react, Marcus launched into a blur of controlled violence, honed from years of Delta Force operations. He wasn't just fighting, he was dismantling. Every strike was precise, every movement calculated to disable and demoralize. Within moments, 2 officers were groaning on the floor, their weapons skittering across the mat. Hollister froze, his arrogance evaporating as he realized the man before him wasn't an ordinary gym owner. This was a soldier, no, a predator who had spent a lifetime perfecting the art of breaking men. And Marcus was only just getting started. The gym echoed with the sounds of groans and clattering metal. 2 officers writhed on the floor, clutching broken limbs, while others stood frozen, their bravado evaporating in the face of Marcus Kane's terrifying efficiency. The silence was broken only by the hum of the overhead lights and the shallow breathing of men who suddenly realized they were prey. "Drop your weapons," Marcus ordered, his voice low but resonant. The command carried more weight than shouted threats ever could. His tone wasn't born of desperation, it was born of certainty. The officers hesitated, glancing at Hollister, who stood rooted to the spot, sweat dripping from his brow. "Don't listen to him." Hollister barked, though his voice cracked slightly. "He's just one man." Marcus's eyes locked on him. One man is all it takes. Before the nearest officer could raise his gun, Marcus closed the distance in a heartbeat. His hand snapped upward, knocking the weapon aside, and his knee drove into the man's ribs with a sickening crack. The officer dropped, gasping like a fish out of water. The others finally scrambled into action, but they were slow. So slow compared to what Marcus had faced overseas. In a single fluid motion, he hurled a barbell plate across the room. It struck one officer square in the chest, knocking him against the wall with a thunderous crash. Another lunged with a baton, but Marcus sidestepped, twisting the man's arm and sending him sprawling face first onto the mat. Now, only Hollister and 2 shaken officers remained standing. Their hands trembled around their weapons, the confidence of the badge stripped away. "Fire." Hollister screamed, desperation replacing authority, but the officers faltered. Shooting a man who had just dismantled half their unit with his bare hands seemed less like enforcing the law and more like signing their own death warrants. Marcus moved again, a blur of muscle and precision. In seconds, their guns were on the floor, their bodies doubled over in pain. That left only Hollister. The lieutenant backed away, his bravado shattered. You're finished, Kane. You touch me, and the whole department will come down on you. You'll never see daylight again. Marcus stepped closer, his shadow falling over the man. You made one mistake, Hollister. Hollister swallowed hard. What's that? You thought I was just a business owner. His hand shot out, gripping Hollister's collar with iron strength. He slammed him against the wall, pinning him effortlessly. Hollister's eyes bulged as Marcus leaned in, his voice a low growl. I commanded Delta Force. I've led men into war zones you can't imagine. I've dismantled drug cartels, toppled warlords, and hunted terrorists in the dead of night. You're nothing but a thug with a badge. The truth in Marcus's words struck harder than his fists ever could. Hollister's legs shook beneath him. You want to rob me? Intimidate my people? You will regret it, Marcus continued, his eyes burning. And I'm not going to kill you because death would be too easy. I'm going to expose you. He released Hollister, letting him collapse to the floor in a heap. The lieutenant gasped for air, but before he could regain his footing, Marcus knelt beside him, pulling a small device from his pocket. It was a compact recorder, the kind Marcus always kept handy. He pressed play, and Hollister's own words from earlier, the threats, the extortion demands, filled the air. Hollister's face drained of color. How? You're not the first corrupt man I've dealt with, Marcus said. And I've learned something. The best way to destroy a predator is to let the world see what he really is. By dawn, Marcus had already set his plan in motion. He delivered copies of the recording and video footage from the gym surveillance cameras to trusted contacts. A local journalist known for exposing corruption, a federal investigator he'd once saved during an overseas mission, and a civil rights lawyer with a reputation for tearing crooked officers apart in court. The story hit the airwaves within 24 hours. Brookhaven Police Unit accused of extortion, brutality blared across headlines. The video of Marcus calmly dismantling the officers, combined with the damning audio of Hollister's threats, spread like wildfire. Public outrage exploded. Citizens who had long whispered about corruption now had undeniable proof. Protests erupted outside the precinct, demanding accountability. Politicians, sensing the shifting tide, scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. For Hollister and his crew, the fall was swift. Internal affairs descended like vultures, and within days, multiple officers were suspended pending investigation. Hollister himself was arrested on charges of extortion, falsifying evidence, and abuse of power. His mugshot, once hidden behind a shield of authority, now circulated widely as a symbol of disgrace. But for Marcus, the victory wasn't about revenge, it was about justice. At Iron Forge Gym, business boomed. People from across Brookhaven flocked, not just to train, but to shake Marcus's hand, to thank him for standing up when others had been too afraid. Mothers brought their sons to join his youth program, veterans volunteered to mentor kids, and the gym transformed into a beacon of hope. Still, Marcus remained humble. When asked why he hadn't pressed charges of his own, he simply replied, "My fight isn't about me. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." One evening, as he locked up the gym, he found a young man waiting by the door. He couldn't have been more than 17, his clothes worn, his eyes wary. "Mr. Kane," the boy asked softly. Marcus nodded. "That's me. My uncle, he used to own a shop down the block. The cops, Hollister's guys, they shut him down. Took everything. He never got over it." The boy's voice cracked. "But you stood up to them. You showed us we don't have to be afraid." Marcus placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. "Fear only wins if we let it. You're stronger than you know. And if you want, I'll help you find that strength." The boy's eyes glistened, and he nodded. Weeks later, Marcus sat in his office overlooking the gym floor. His phone buzzed. It was a call from a government contact. "You really stirred up a storm in Brookhaven," the voice said with a chuckle. "Word is, the FBI wants to bring you in as a consultant. They need men who understand the battlefield, both abroad and at home." Marcus glanced at the bustling gym below. Kids sparring, veterans training, laughter echoing off the walls. He smiled faintly. "I already have a battlefield," he replied, "and I'm winning the war right here." When he hung up, he leaned back in his chair, a rare sense of peace settling over him. He knew the fight against corruption was far from over. Men like Hollister would always crawl out of the shadows. But now Brookhaven had a guardian who wouldn't flinch, wouldn't back down, and wouldn't hesitate to strike when the innocent were threatened. Marcus Kane, the ruthless Delta Force commander turned business owner, had made one thing clear. You could rob him of money, property, or peace for a moment, but you could never rob him of his resolve. And for those who tried, the reckoning would always come.